Good morning to everyone who's joined us online and everyone here. I just want to say off the bat, it's warm to my heart to see people here. So thank you for showing up here. And my name is Dasgupta. I'm the CEO of WRI. You're at the Harmon Center. This is our conference facility at WRI. We are really very proud to host this. I have a self-interest. I was cities director when we started this program as cities team. So I'm very happy this is growing. But I'm very happy to host that we are hosting alongside the Commission for Environmental Cooperation and United Nations Environment Program. So it's wonderful to do this together. This is the third celebration of the World Clean Air Day. This year's theme is Air We Share. So what we want to do today is actually reflect on the 30 years of cooperation in North America. So you'll hear from people from Canada, leaders from United States, and a leader from Mexico. This regional cooperation we think is critical for success, and not only is critical for this region, but there's lots to learn from this collaboration across boundaries, because air doesn't have geographical boundaries. And so that's why what we want to showcase, that's what you'll hear. You'll also hear from Beatrice after the three speakers. We will have a panel. Beatrice Gardner is our lead in air quality based in Mexico. She's been working in Mexico and all over the world. Will lead a panel. And everyone that's connected, I want to encourage you to share your questions. We'll have an open question answer period that Beatrice will manage after. So that's the basic plan for today. I just want to say that people who have joined, in the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is this little button that has a kind of a symbol of a world. I believe you can listen to this in simultaneous interpretation in French and Spanish. So please do so. Please participate. There are hundreds of people here. No, there are not hundreds of people here, but there are a lot of people here, but we want to hear from you. We want to, I hope in 2.5 years, we have learned to do a successful hybrid event. So I really encourage you to participate through chat and your question, and Betty will help us navigate this. I just want to say 2 words about the air quality program here at WRI. Some of the basic obvious fact is very clear to you. WHO pointed out 99% of the world's population, that includes all of us in this room and all of you, I think, listening, except you live in northern Finland or something, that we are breathing unhealthy air. All of us are. And 7 million people die every year of unhealthy air, 90% of them in poor and emerging countries. So this is not only terrible, it's very unequal. Compared to 7 million, just to be clear, 1.3 million people die in road accidents around the world, just comparing that number, which is terrible itself. So the basic message from our work is that this is a collaborative effort. Collaboration across different segments of society, different sectors, but also across different jurisdictions, which will be one theme that will emerge today. In WRI, what we have focused in the Ross Center is actually the connection between clean air and climate. Historically, we've been working on climate. There is a very direct connection. All the things you need to do for clean air is the same things you need to do for climate. So what we have learned is how do one talk about these things together, and sometimes very successfully, not always, sometimes very successfully. The Clean Air Catalyst, the program that we're hosting here, is a global partnership funded by the UNEP, the United Nations, United States Agency for International Development, USAID is easy to say, but it works in 3 cities, Indore in India and Jakarta in Indonesia and Nairobi in Kenya. So the goal is to learn how to do this collaborative work, and from that expand this out. The CAN-AIRI alert and the air quality community of practices for us to learn across Africa, across Latin America and Asia. So that's the project. I'm really looking for the discussion. This is a very important moment for us to connect to not only clean air and what else is happening in the world, and it's fantastic. It's happening just the month that we actually have the climate discussion coming on. With that said, I want to introduce our first of the 3 speakers. You will hear from, in a minute, the UNEP, the Environmental Programs Director for North America. And I want to make sure I introduce Barbara. Barbara's going to talk about, but before Barbara comes in, we have a fantastic film that we want to share, and then Barbara, you come in after that. All right? All right. I will play the role of kind of moving this along as we go forward. Thank you for everyone joining. You can roll the film, and Barbara, you come in.
Is there anything we share more intimately with every other being on the planet than air? Yet 99% of us are breathing polluted air, which kills 7 million people each year. Many of these deaths are because of exposure to PM 2.5, a pollution particle that is 30 times smaller than a human hair. Outdoor air pollution causes heart disease, lung cancer, and respiratory diseases. But we're not safe indoors either. In fact, 3.8 of those 7 million deaths are household air pollution related. Unsafe stoves that use solid fuels like kerosene, wood, animal dung, and crop waste expose 2.4 billion people to dangerous levels of household air pollution. Air pollution knows no borders. It travels across cities, countries, and continents. It is taking a toll on our economies, racking up $8.1 trillion in healthcare costs, or 6.1% of global GDP. And while we are driving the problem by using fossil fuels for energy, industry, and transport, using unclean fuels for cooking, burning trash and crops, we also hold the solutions. On International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies, we need to take action. We need to make a shift to renewable energy and modern bioenergy, adopt clean and efficient cookstoves, use more sustainable building materials, switch to low-emission electric vehicles, walk, cycle, transform the global food system, reduce trash burning. We just need to start now. Let's commit together to strengthen cooperation, to collect and share the right information, to raise awareness. The future is not a foregone conclusion. It's time to rewrite it now. Let's all play our part to improve the air we share.
Hello, everyone. As Ani said, I'm Barbara Hendry. I'm the Director for the United Nations Environment Program Regional Office for North America. It's absolutely great to be here. I want to start with a few words of thanks. First, thanks to Ani and WRI for warmly welcoming us to this celebration of the International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. It's great to be here in this beautiful conference room in Washington, D.C. Thanks to all of you for being here in person. It's great to actually see people in person. And also thanks to everyone who's joining us online. And finally, I want to say a special word of thanks to the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, without whose support we couldn't have had this event, and particularly who's providing the translation for all of you online. So this day, September 7th, in 2019, was designated by the United Nations General Assembly as the International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies in recognition of the urgent challenge of air pollution. Numerous events are being held all over the world on this day under the banner of Clean Air for Blue Skies to raise public awareness of this threat to human health and well-being and to the well-being of our planet. As Ani has said, we have a really startling statistic. It's estimated that 7 million premature deaths happen globally each year due to air pollution. It's the single greatest environmental threat to human health that there is. And it's also the fourth highest risk factor for humans globally. So it's a major, major concern. And as Ani also said, there's a really strong link here to climate. Air pollution exacerbates climate change as pollutants such as black carbon and ozone heat the atmosphere and increase warming. So we have a complex interrelated challenge here. It's an agenda also that requires action, not just in individual jurisdictions, but in a coordinated way across communities, across countries, and across regions of the world. Air pollution doesn't stop at community or national boundaries. And that's why the theme of this year's Clean Air for Blue Skies Day is the air we share, in recognition of the transboundary nature of the challenge and the need that we have for integrated and coordinated planning, monitoring, and intervention. So our role as the United Nations Environment Program is to support action on air pollution globally, including through undertaking assessments of progress in improving air quality by the member states of the United Nations. Recently, UNEP published a global summary of actions on air quality, which you can find on our website, taking stock of policies and programs and their impact around the world. And there was a deep dive into 6 regions with more specific information. In our region, the report Actions on Air Quality in North America, which you can also find on our website, was published earlier this year, supported by the UNEP regional office here in Washington, DC. We worked very closely with Canadian and US government counterparts and experts in preparing this report. And we are really delighted to have many of you in the room today participating in this conversation. So it's a pressing agenda. It's a complex agenda that requires a lot of cooperation horizontally and vertically. And so that's why we're really excited to have you here. And we are very much looking forward to the discussion. We're particularly pleased to have with us today the newly appointed Executive Director of the Commission on Environmental Cooperation, Daniel Tailant. Daniel is a seasoned global advocate for environmental justice and environmental protection, spanning decades with international agencies and as an advisor to governments and civil society in Latin America and around the world. And so without further ado, I am delighted to hand the floor to Daniel. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you, Barbara, for that kind introduction, and Ani and the team really that has made this meeting possible. It's a pleasure to be here on this such an important day. You know, air quality really interacts with so many dimensions of our lives. It's not only about our health and breathing, but it's about our crops. And as some of you have already indicated, it's about our climate. And we've never been more aware of the delicate nature of our air than we are today, because it has such an important role to play with the health of our atmosphere. And as the climate emergency that we are facing accelerates, we are also very, very much aware that we all have to act. This is an all of society challenge that we face. It's an all of society moment where we have to put the best that we have available to address this emergency. Air pollution anywhere is air pollution everywhere. You know, we've said this, pollution doesn't respect boundaries. The air circulates not only across our hemisphere, across North America, which brought us here today, but it really goes all around the world. And so it's very important that we everywhere are acting to address our air quality problem. And air quality, as we've also mentioned, is really an intersection to social, environmental, and climate equity. You know, this is a fundamental part of the problem that we face when we talk about environmental justice. And you know, not all communities suffer equally the burden of air quality problems. And you know, from the work that we've been doing in the region, we know of this, and it's very important to identify those that are most vulnerable to air quality problems. The Commission for Environmental Cooperation, which I'm now new director of, has been working on air quality issues and other environmental issues across the region for several decades now, 30 years already, fostering the promotion of data, collection of data, inventories, monitoring air quality, helping the countries and the different institutions that work on air quality to standardize across the board and figure out how to best manage this data, providing air information to the public, being transparent about air quality. And some of you have worked locally in the different countries to really get at the local air pollution, get that information out and help communities. And also importantly, and this is a forum where we do this, garnering the political support for this. We need to get our countries aligned. We need to collaborate and understand that this is one environment and promote these actions regionally in a shared way. We all have a responsibility, especially now with our climate emergency, to do more. And this is a call that we're making from the CC, but also from the various institutions that we represent and governments. We need to do more, we need to do it faster, and we need to do it better. The climate emergency is moving quickly, and we need to act before it becomes too late. We've been seeing the news recently in Pakistan of the terrible floods that we're facing. This is an indicator that something is dreadfully wrong in this part of the world. It has to do with glacier melt, something that I've been working on for many years, and we see this beginning to happen in many regions, similar problems. But I'm going to go back to the COVID days at the very beginning, where we shut everything down, because that same region of the world showed us something very important, which is when we stop polluting, when we close the industry for a moment, when we stop the planes, when we stop the cars, when we stop emitting the black carbon that really deteriorates our air quality, what happened? We saw the Himalayas for the first time. The air cleaned. And when I talk to my kids about the enormous challenges that we have to fix our climate problem, and we used to say, well, we can't really stop everything. We can't stop polluting because we need to grow, we need to expand. We did it in a few weeks. We cleaned the air in a matter of weeks. And that is a big lesson for us, that addressing our air quality is possible if we work collectively, if we work together, if we work in a very targeted way to tackle the climate emergency. So it's a pleasure to be with you today, to hear what we have done in the past, but also to explore what we will do in the future. And so hopefully from the CEC, we'll be more and more engaged and really contributing to a hemispheric, to a North American, and to a global process to fix our climate problem and improve our air. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I'd now like to turn the floor over to Jane Nishida, who's an assistant administrator at the U.S. Environment Protection Agency. Jane has 3 decades of environmental experience working in federal and state government and international and non-governmental organizations. Jane leads EPA's Office of International and Tribal Affairs and is also a longtime partner and collaborator with UNEP. Jane, over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. And I would also like to extend my thanks to Ani and the World Resources Institute, to Barbara and UNEP North America, as well as to Daniel, our new executive director at the CEC. You have seen from the video presentation and the speakers that preceded me, you have heard about the devastating impacts of air pollution in terms of environmental health. One thing I would like to note that you may not be aware of is that air quality or air pollution was recently named one of the non-communicable diseases by the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization had essentially identified non-communicable diseases as tobacco, smoking, lack of exercise, poor diet, et cetera. And it wasn't until organizations like the ones who are appearing today identified air pollution as a serious non-communicable disease that WHO has now identified. And I think that's an important development. Even though we have, for the last 50 years in the United States, seen significant progress since the passage of the Clean Air Act, we, as Ani and others have mentioned, that problem has been exacerbated by climate change. And all we have to do is turn on the news in the United States or anywhere around the world, and we see the devastating wildfires in California that not only affect human health, but also affect the energy supply. California is now struggling about their power grid, and I think you have heard that. Or we have seen the devastating floods. For the US, we had devastating floods this weekend in northern Georgia. A few weeks ago, we had devastating floods in Jackson, Mississippi, that then exacerbates other problems. Administrator Regan is right now in Jackson dealing with the drinking water supply issues that were caused by the flooding in Jackson, that were caused by the extreme weather events that we're seeing from climate change. So what we know is that we have to tackle this because it is a crisis. As Ani has mentioned, you cannot de-link climate change from air pollution and some of the other environmental challenges that we are facing. So when President Biden took office, he launched the most ambitious environmental agenda in our nation's history. Since then, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has been working to implement the president's vision to restore scientific integrity, to protect clean air, to confront climate change, and to advance environmental justice. That is why the Biden administration has taken a whole of government approach, and through the Inflation Reduction Act is making historic investments to address these crises. This is the most consequential climate law in the United States history. It will change the lives of millions of people impacted by the climate crisis, put the US on track to cut our emissions in half by 2030 and reach our net zero no later than 2050, and uplift historically marginalized communities and spur development of clean technologies. The legislation supports efforts through EPA to reduce air pollution around schools and underserved areas, at ports, and by replacing dirty trucks and heavy-duty vehicles with zero emission options. The legislation also puts billions of dollars towards environmental and climate grants to address the long-standing and disproportionate pollution facing communities that are low income and communities of color, including support for air monitoring for communities on the fence line. And the legislation creates a new fund that will support efforts to deploy zero emission technologies like solar rooftops to help propel clean energy economy to new heights. The legislation also put resources towards reducing methane emissions from oil and gas sectors. The recent global methane assessment that was released by UNEP makes a compelling case that there are available and effective low and no cost methane reduction measures in these sectors. In addition to the Inflation Reduction Act, EPA has also received significant funding under the bipartisan infrastructure law, including $5 billion to replace existing school buses with zero emission and low emission models. As we implement this historic legislation, there are a few guiding principles. The first is that under President Biden and Administrator Regan, we have made it clear that elevating environmental justice is a co-equal priority with securing clean air and addressing climate change. Indeed, these goals are inseparable. So as we move forward to make progress on a range of climate and clean air issues, we are keenly attentive to how our policies and programs will impact pollution and health at the community level. Secondly, the president's executive order reflect climate change and environmental justice are issues where the administration has called for a whole of government approach. So EPA's work is complemented by initiatives and investments that are being made by our other federal agencies and across the federal government. And third, engaging broadly and meaningfully with a diverse array of stakeholders, including industries that are affected by our regulations and policies, is essential. Not just because we are public servants who are charged with listening to the public that we serve, but because we know that reaching good outcomes depends on having a transparent process that meaningfully engages both partners and stakeholders outside the agency. Air quality does not respect political boundaries, and we need the partnership and the transboundary and regional cooperation more than ever today. This partnership is needed both at the national as well as the subnational level. Prior to joining EPA, I was the Secretary of the Maryland Department of the Environment, and the states in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic had to form a coalition called the Ozone Transport Commission in order for us to meet the clean air goals under the Clean Air Act. We could not do it individually as states. We had to, again, form alliances to address the transboundary impacts of air pollution. We also are doing this on a regional level and a national level. And so I'm very pleased that I'm joined today by my colleagues from Canada and Mexico, albeit virtually, and we will share what commitments we have made during the most recent CEC council session that was held in July. There in Merida, Mexico, we announced that the CEC will provide $2 million to launch the second cycle of the EJ for climate grant programs. And this grant program essentially provides funds, particularly to vulnerable communities, to address the climate impacts in their communities. In addition, we announced that we are going to the implementation phase of another initiative called the Air Quality Improvement for Environmental Justice Project. And this initiative was actually announced last year. We're now going to the implementation phase. And under this project, essentially communities have identified high risk exposure to both carbon and particulate matter, and this grant would assist them. In addition to the trilateral work that we're doing between Mexico, Canada, and the US and Canada also has an air quality agreement where we work on a number of policy programs. And US and Mexico has a Border 2025 program where, again, we work bilaterally on air quality issues. In closing, I want to commend the UNEP for their launch of the Actions for Air Quality in North American report. I look forward to hearing more about it in the next session and also hearing the moderated discussion. I would like to again thank WRI, UNEP, and the CEC for bringing us together today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. I just want to thank Barbara and Daniel. It's so wonderful to co-host this together with you. Thank you for being here. And Jane, it's been with our team, with USAID support on the Clean Air Catalyst, is one of the most innovative things we're doing, simply because it looks at the root cause rather than just the outcome. It's been a pleasure to work with your team there. Just want to say that. I think all of us should congratulate Jane here as a part of the administration on the Inflation Reduction Act. There hasn't been a legislation of this size, simply because anywhere it's hundreds of billions of dollars of funding for climate action, but focus on what Jane said on changing the economy towards a low carbon economy. So we are super excited and super positive about it, and congratulations to you on that. I think it will be a sea change, not only in the United States, but your job is to convince the rest of the world of what needs to be done, right? And we feel very strongly about the position of the United States in upcoming discussions. So we can talk about this separately, but very excited about it. As Jane said, this story is about actually cooperation among countries and regional cooperation that you heard about. So I want to introduce you our next speaker from Canada. Dr. C.C. Siwe is currently the Acting Associate Assistant Deputy Minister for the Environmental Protection Branch in the Department of Environment and Climate Change Canada. Cecile, I hope I said that correctly, all of that. Before joining the department, she spent 5 years with the Department of Natural Resources of Canada as a Director General for CanMed Energy Devon, a federal agency, research agency, and technology development facility for energy innovation. She's joining us virtually. Cecile.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and hello to everyone. I am very pleased to be here to speak about Canada's contribution to addressing air quality in North America, and you will hear some of the themes that have been already echoed by previous speakers. So starting on what we've been doing on the national front, air quality management in Canada is a cooperative effort between all levels of government under the framework of something that we call the Air Quality Management System, or AQMS. This was developed through extensive multi-stakeholder process, which involved all jurisdictions and was adopted in 2012. The collaborative nature of the process and the design have been key to the success of the AQMS, the Air Quality Management System. It really is the cornerstone of the federal government's approach to addressing air pollution. It includes a number of components, such as the Canadian Ambient Air Quality Standards to drive air quality improvements, and nationally applicable emissions requirements, both established by the federal government and implemented by provinces and territories in their air zones. It also includes federally managed airsheds, which are cross-jurisdictional. The government is also taking action to address emissions from sources such as vehicle fuels and engines, as well as a host of consumer and commercial products. However, certain pollutants, including fine particulate matter and ammonia, remain a challenge. Canada has also been taking significant action on climate change and is increasingly turning its attention to the related issues of environmental justice. A number of actions aimed at reducing GHGs and addressing so-called pollution hotspots are also helping to improve air quality. Addressing methane is also a key priority for the government, and we are developing a plan to significantly reduce emissions across the broader Canadian economy. And as you know, as a co-benefit, these actions will also reduce emissions of air pollutants such as VOCs and particulate matter. And of course, reducing methane will help to reduce global background levels of ground level ozone. While Canada enjoys clean air, close to 1/3 of the population still lives in areas where ambient conditions for pollution are not met. And of course, air quality is impacted by domestic sources and air pollution that originates outside our borders, which takes me to the next point of the transboundary air pollution, which we heard about from our previous speaker. Canada and the US recognize this when working to address the devastating effects of acid rain, which ultimately resulted in the Canada-US Air Quality Agreement, or the AQA, which was adopted 30 years ago and updated in 2000. The agreement has been a real success story in terms of reducing acid rain and tackling ozone. It has led to dramatic reductions in key air pollutants such as SO2. So for sulfur dioxide, we realized 78% reduction in emissions in Canada, and the comparable number for the US was 92%. And for NO2, 36% and 68% in the US. And these achievements were made possible by actions that we took in Canada, such as permanently closing coal-fired electric power generation facilities and reducing emissions from major combustion sources from metal and smelting operations. Implementation of Canada's multi-sector air pollutant regulations, which was first introduced in 2016, also promised to drive these emissions down even further. Canada and the US have achieved these reductions through sustained collaboration between scientific, policy, and regulatory branches of government at all levels, at the federal level, the provincial or state level, and municipal levels. We have also engaged with key emitting sectors directly. I would now like to share a few things about the lessons we've learned over the past 30 years, as this information may be helpful to other parts of the world that may wish to address the similar air quality challenges. Regional cooperation is key for addressing transboundary flow of pollutants. We already heard that from the previous speaker. And effective cooperation requires active stakeholder engagement from all levels of government that focuses on shared, reliable data and understanding of tools that are available or may need to be developed. The value of strong scientific underpinning for this policy work cannot be overstated. As we have shown in Canada, a robust domestic framework is key, and it is crucial to establish resilient air quality management programs supported by strong legal and regulatory frameworks. We have the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which provides the federal government with various regulatory and non-regulatory tools to control air pollution. The Act also enables us to establish environmental and health-based air quality objectives. Now, looking to the future, while Canada and the US continue to meet their respective commitments under the agreement, we acknowledge that there is still room for improvement. In 2019, Canada and the US agreed to undertake a review and assessment of the AQA, which is now nearing completion, after which we may decide to amend the agreement. Beyond the bilateral work under the AQA, I just want to briefly touch on some of the other international work in which we are actively engaged. We have bilateral projects with Mexico, including providing technical and financial support for NDC implementation in Mexico's oil and gas sector to improve measurement, reporting, and verification of greenhouse gases and short-lived climate pollutants such as methane and black carbon. We also work collaborative with Mexico and the US on a number of initiatives under the CEC. On the multilateral front, we are involved in several fora that focus on reducing short-lived climate pollutants alongside US, Mexico, and others. We are proud to co-found the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and we currently chair the Global Methane Initiative, and we signed the Global Methane Pledge at its launch. Canada and the US work closely under the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, or the Air Convention for short. For example, Canada and the US are heavily involved in the review of the convention's Gothenburg Protocol. We look forward to working with the US and Mexico under the newly launched Forum for International Cooperation on Air Pollution. So in closing, I would like to thank UNEP, the World Resources Institute, and the CEC for the invitation to speak with you today. We are very proud of the work we have done with the US and Mexico, and we look forward to continuing to work further to reduce air pollution and ensure clean air for current and future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. I hope you can see us. It was wonderful to hear you. Thank you for joining us. I personally want to thank you for highlighting the importance of science in solving air quality issues. And both you and Jane both highlighted the focus on vulnerable population, both in Canada and the United States in your policies. So this is we'll hear more about it, but thank you for raising that. It was great to have you. I want to introduce our third speaker from Mexico, Miguel. Miguel Zeron is the head of International Affairs Unit, Secretary of Environment and Natural Resources in Mexico. Miguel currently serves as the head of the Coordinating Unit for International Affairs of Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. Prior to joining the Secretary in 2021, Miguel specialized in qualitative study of complex phenomena in societies, leading Beta Cora Social's regional office in Mexico, Colombia, and Chile. Miguel is going to join us virtually. I can see him on the screen. Miguel, over to you.
Muchas gracias, Annie. Quiero extender también el agradecimiento y la felicitación de la
Thank you very
organización.
much. I would like to congratulate the organization for this event, Annie, Barbara, Jane, Daniel, and also Cecile. And I would like to extend greetings from the Secretary of the Environment and Natural Resources, Ms. Maria Luisa Albores Gonzalez, who asked me to represent in this third year of clean air, not only to think together about the success that we have had as a region that Cecile and Jane have mentioned, but also to mention the challenges that we have in guaranteeing the quality of the air that we share. In this sense, the quality of our air does not only have an impact on diversity in the ecosystem, but it is also a risk for human beings. And this is one of the deaths, one of the reasons of fatalities. And for this reason, our region has taken action on this issue as a common front, since atmospheric pollutants can be transported for long distance across rural and urban areas, and it could be access any border. The strategy that we have in North America has two important elements. On one side, the technical, to strengthen technologies, and also to generate comparable data that will support decision-making for all these programs and policies where we collaborate and we cooperate bilaterally. Also, in a second sense, to maintain and give access to the population in the status of the air quality that we breathe. In this sense, and I'm going to be very brief because Jane and Cecile had made a very good summary of the collaboration that we have in the 3 countries. And these are the projects that we have in our countries in order to make progress in public policies, like I said, in the center of people and mostly the most vulnerable. At a global level, we have the Coalition of Clean Air. We have signed and we promote in different form, bilateral forum, trilateral, and global, the promotion of emissions. And yesterday we presented and we had an event on the Montreal Protocol, and through which it will prevent 0.5 centigrades of the degrees in 2025, thanks to all the signing countries. Also, the CEC, we also participate in the Summit of North America linked to climate change, but also we have projects with local areas in with the use of burning wood. And we work jointly in the Forum of Ministers for the Environment in Latin America and the Caribbean, where we signed the control of clean atmosphere. And as a characteristic of the Mexican government, the persons in 2004, the PRTR, we are designing and implementing the national strategy of air quality. And also we implemented programs for the management of improvement quality, air quality, together with local governments. And we're going from the federal government all the way to the local government in order to improve air quality for people. Like Jane mentioned, we have an environmental program, Border Program 2025, and we started the design for strategy to reduce the HFCs in the action plan in Mexico. These actions are not only in the environmental sector, but with other sectors. I'm sorry, I lost his audio. I'm sorry, he doesn't have any audio. Through more than 120 projects.
We can hear you, Miguel.
Les compartía que hemos
I was
articulado
saying that we have, he has very bad audio, I'm sorry. This has allowed us to eliminate the national use of 99% of the substances depleting of the ozone. And we know that any environmental topic has a social dimension. And we have also learned in these and other forums that those who have less responsibility in causing imbalance in our ecosystems in vulnerable communities are the ones that suffered all the catastrophic events due to air pollution. And this is why we look for the well-being and environmental justice as an important criteria of our policies, and have a healthy environment and continue contributing and looking for contribution in our countries in order to obtain the objectives that we have, including the air that we share. Thank you, Annie, and thank you to all.
Thank you, Miguel. In spite of this little technical glitch that we just had, we heard you very clearly. So thank you for joining us. And I think all of us should thank Cecilia and Miguel for choosing not to fly here, because we are breathing a slightly cleaner air because of that. So I really appreciate it. So you heard from 3 leaders from 3 countries. We're going to now shift gear to a panel discussion with fantastic experts. I'm going to introduce Beatrice Gardner, who's going to moderate. Betty, come. I also want to encourage the panel members to come and sit while I introduce Betty, and Betty's going to introduce all of you. Beatrice is the Air Quality Director of our Global Air Quality Program based in Mexico. She's the director from Mexico. She co-leads the air quality program in WRI. But Betty comes to WRI with a lot of expertise of actually doing for Mexico City for many years, to bringing science and policy together. She's one of the people I've learned a lot from about how to convert science, which is critical, you heard from Cecile, to actual policy making and difficult choices people have to make, locations have to make to take action. And Mexico City, you will remember the history of Mexico City is actually a history of very difficult time and success overall. So Betty's going to lead us. Betty, thank you for leading us through this. And we're just about 5 minutes behind schedules. That's not too bad for WRI standards. And you also want to remind you the questions from our audience that's listening.
So thank you. Yes, we may go over a few minutes after the time that we planned. So please, for the audience that is listening and watching us, send us your comments, your questions. So I'm very pleased to have this panel. Thank you so much. I will just introduce the panelists, and then we will all go over each of them, just asking and listening to their views, their experiences. So first we have Gary Clayman. He's director of Orbis Air. And it happens that he was the lead consultant of the actions of air quality in North America that we just heard about this morning. And he's launched, and please go and take a piece of the summary, but please also go and take a look at the document. We also have Eddie Chang. She's joining us from abroad, from far from here. Eddie is the Deputy Executive Officer from the California Air Resources Board. Thank you, Eddie, for being here. We also have Susan Annenberg. She is the Director of Climate and Health Institute at the George Washington University. Thank you so much. And also we have in the panel Orlando Cabrera Rivera. He is the head of the Unit for Environmental Quality at the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. So thank you so much. So we will go over, and I guess we have an excellent presentations and comments. Thank you so much for our previous speakers. And I will start with Gary. Gary, you were the lead consultant of the UNEP's recent Actions of Air Quality in North America report. There is a lot, as we said, that we can read from it, but we would like to listen from you. What are some of the key messages that you will highlight in the report about the North American experience with the air quality management?
Thanks so much, Beatrice. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, there were many messages that came out in this report, but I think you've already heard this morning from our great keynote speakers, and you'll hear from other panelists, the key messages coming through loud and clear. And the primary message is that we know how to do this. It's an optimistic message. There has been tremendous progress in reducing air pollution in North America. It has taken a long time. In some cases, we're celebrating, or while we were writing the report, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the US Clean Air Act, the 30th anniversary of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. And I think the Mexican officials here can attest to the many decades that have been spent trying to clean up the air in Mexico City. But progress has been made. Despite that progress, I think we also heard that the work is not done. That disparities remain, particularly when you look by socioeconomic status. And we're going to hear more about environmental justice from our other panelists. So those are the key messages. And I think if we look for lessons for other countries that are trying to undertake air quality management planning, we do know how to do this. This is a science that, has worked well. What are the, 6 key takeaways that we could distill from the report? I would say number 1 is the foundational role of air quality monitoring and air quality standards. There's the old adage, you can't manage what you can't measure. So it's really key to have monitors in place to help calibrate satellites and to be able to track progress against the goals, the air quality standards that people set. Number 2, we heard about regional cooperation. no matter how hard any one jurisdiction works to control their air pollution, whatever regulation they pass, whatever law they put in place, they won't be able to improve their air quality to healthy levels if their upwind neighbor is not working in collaboration with them. And they need to recognize the role they're playing in polluting their neighbors downwind. The third lesson I would say is that air quality management is iterative. This is not a one and done type of activity. It's fantastic to get started, pass a law, implement a regulation, but then track progress and know you're going to have to come back and look and maybe strengthen those regulations, maybe pass another law, maybe enhance enforcement. But it's an iterative process. So you come back and you make slow and steady progress over time. Fourth, really important to have legal instruments that force action when you're not meeting your standards. Embedding the UNEP has also, or UN Environment Program also has a report out that looks at the legal framework for air quality. So I would encourage folks to look at that as well. The fifth, we've already heard people talking about stakeholder buy-in, but really having a shared understanding of the data and the models that are used to undertake an assessment and having a shared agreement on the assumptions for the assessment process is critical to having people buy into the solutions. And the last lesson that I would talk about is integrated planning. We've already talked about the broader sustainability framework, the sustainable development goals that UNEP has put out there. Air quality is certainly central to them, but we recognize that the emissions that are responsible for air pollution, there really are no good emissions. I mean, all of the emissions need to be reduced because you're going to see multiple development benefits. Yes, public health benefits from air pollution is why we're all here, but we've already heard that you get climate benefits, you get energy security and food security benefits, you get broader economic benefits, quality of life benefits that will make anybody who undertakes air quality management very glad that they reduced all of the emissions they did. So those are the key points.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, we encourage everyone to take a look at the document. I will go with Eddie. And Eddie, I guess we heard today about the disparities, and not only in the US, but throughout the US, the low-income minority and marginalized population experience high exposure levels. We have seen that actually in many other parts of the world. And this community often live near, we know, we mentioned also the sources, they live near air pollution sources. We have many industrial facilities, major roadways, and ports, among others. But considering California was the first state in the US to formalize the efforts addressing inequities in air pollution exposure at the community level. So we would like to know, Eddie, if you can tell us, how is California building environmental justice into its air quality management?
Well, thank you so much, Beatrice, and to WR, UNEP, and the CEC for inviting me to be here today on this very illustrious panel. I'm sorry I can't be there in Washington, D.C. with you, especially because in Sacramento, we hit a high of 116 degrees yesterday. I'd much rather be there. So California is often invited to panels like this, largely for the unfortunate reason that we have the dirtiest air in the United States. At its worst, Los Angeles had over 200 days of unhealthy air a year, and we had peak smog levels that were 5 times the allowable level. We have made huge strides in the past 50 years in using a lot of the strategies that Gary just talked about. Iterative regulatory structures, legal requirements. We have cleaned up cars, trucks, the industrial sector, construction equipment, hairspray, lawnmowers, pretty much everything under the sun. We've managed to cut peak air pollution in the Los Angeles area by 60% and reduce the hours that people are exposed to unhealthy air by 90%. So we've made enormous progress, but as we've talked about today, that progress has not been evenly distributed. We still have the worst air pollution in the nation, And we know that Black and brown people and low-income people are more likely to live near highways, ports, rail yards, industrial facilities, and so they experience higher exposure to air pollution. Almost 90% of the population in California that is most impacted by environmental pollution is Black, Latino, Native American, and Pacific Islander. So in 2016, our legislature created a new program called the Community Air Protection Program, or AB 617. And this program focuses attention and resources on the hundreds of communities that are disproportionately impacted by poor air quality. So this program requires our local air districts and CARB, we're the state air agency, to ensure that community members have a seat at the table when we're determining how to address these air pollution burdens, which are experienced predominantly by people of color in California. So AB 617 really flips the script on air pollution control. So traditionally in our programs, we focus on pollution sources, right? We try to figure out how to reduce emissions from the source. AB 617 focuses on pollution receptors, so the communities that are receiving emissions from every pollution source. This program, I'll be honest, it's been really challenging to implement for us and the local air districts. It's a whole new way of working, and it's a new way of interacting with communities. The communities that we select for the program convene community steering committees, which work with the local air districts to co-create community emission reduction plans, or SERPs. And these SERPs reflect the community's priorities for emission reductions. And depending on what community it is, it could be different. It might vary from truck traffic in the neighborhood to pesticides to a specific industrial source that impacts that community. CARB, the air districts have invested in additional staffing, community monitoring, as well as capacity building grants and funds to incentivize reductions in those communities. And there's also been a tremendous effort from the community members and the community steering committee members. They invest countless hours and effort in developing and implementing these SERPs. There are a lot of important lessons about community engagement that are transferable to other jurisdictions. The need for transparency in our work, and the need for building and maintaining trust with communities. I also want to note that just because AB 617 is community focused doesn't mean that it's sort of like a US focus. One of our first communities was Calexico, the Calexico El Centro area, which is in Eastern California, and it sits right on the US-Mexico border across from the much larger city of Mexicali. And one of our most recently selected communities is the International Border community just south of San Diego. So these are definitely communities that are experiencing sort of these transboundary impacts. In closing, I want to sort of tie this together as we've talked about climate and air pollution and community exposure, and sort of talk about the fact that there are solutions that give us a win-win-win. And those solutions are the ones that phase out combustion. You may have heard a couple of weeks ago that California adopted a regulation prohibiting the sale of combustion cars and trucks in the state after 2035. And later this fall, our board is going to be considering a regulation to require government and large fleets to deploy zero-emission trucks. These measures are important milestones that signify our commitment to transition from combustion to zero-emission alternatives wherever feasible, for climate change, for regional air pollution, and for communities. So thank you for the time to be able to talk about our program.
Thank you so much, Eddie. It was a great review. And yeah, good news, all this announcement. So, well, we will go with Susan. Susan, you recently co-authored a study of 13 cities to determine the extent of health threats by air pollution in not only North America, but many cities around the world. This is definitely something that we will recommend to take a look. This study was published in Lancet Planetary Health, so please also take a look. A lot of good information and knowledge. And well, Susan, we would like to know, based on your study, what did you find from this? I mean, there are many cities there, but how important do you think is the role at the city level action? in responding to this ongoing crisis that we have been talking about?
Thank you for the question and for inviting me to participate in this panel, which I'm honored to be on, and sharing some of the insights from the current scientific research on air quality in our region. And just one quick correction, this is 13,000 cities. This is, I'm gonna start actually with a piece of good news, followed by some bad news, and then some more good news. So I was actually here in this very room participating in a panel, what was that, 5 years or so ago? 3.5, okay, well, it feels like a lifetime ago, it was pre-COVID, talking about urban air quality. And it is just so amazing to me, the giant leaps we have made as a scientific community in our ability to track air quality around the world. We no longer have to rely only on very expensive ground-based monitoring. We have all kinds of new techniques that open up the world of opportunity in terms of tracking air quality. So we have satellites, we have low-cost sensors, we have mobile monitoring, and the list goes on. So we now have a lot more information about how cities are now experiencing air quality spatially as well as temporally. And this is revealing some new insights. So we can say that air quality has been improving dramatically in many North American cities as a result of very, very effective air quality management programs. But now to the bad news, and unfortunately there's several pieces of the bad news. The first is that our air quality standards are not protective of public health. So for example, in the United States, our PM 2.5 national ambient air quality standard is 2.5 times the World Health Organization guideline for air quality. For nitrogen dioxide, it's 10 times higher. And this is not protective of public health. So even though most of our jurisdictions within the United States are in attainment for our national ambient air quality standards, these standards are not tight enough and they're not protecting public health. The second piece of bad news is that air quality has not improved equitably, as we've heard other speakers talk about today. And our research has contributed to that as well. We heard earlier about how air quality improved during the COVID lockdowns. And we were able to use satellite data to track how much has it improved for different neighborhoods within individual communities, for different subpopulations. And we found that while air quality did improve across the board for pretty much all population subgroups, air quality is still very inequitably distributed, even though we cut about 50% of passenger vehicle traffic from the roads. So that tells you something, that our air pollution disparities are so high that even about a 50% drop in passenger vehicle traffic is not enough to erase those disparities. And then of course, the third challenge that everybody has already talked about is climate change. So we have seen massive improvements in fine particulate matter over the past decades, and that has started to bottom out. That has started to slow on a national average. And that is driven by the increase in wildfire smoke that we are experiencing across the West, not just the West, across the entire country, but it's going to be harder to attain our national ambient air quality standards in the future under a warmed climate because of how climate change is influencing wildfire smoke and dust and biogenic volatile organic compounds, making it easier to form ozone. So this remains a very important challenge. Of course, this is also an opportunity. I promise to end on a positive note. Some good news is that these are all very interrelated problems that have a single solution: to move away from fossil fuel combustion, as we just heard. And unfortunately, though, all of the ways to reduce fossil fuel combustion are not equal in terms of the co-benefits they would have for climate change, for air quality, and public health. So we really need to move towards integrated assessment of how every individual action will address multiple problems simultaneously, knowing that carbon capture and sequestration might reduce CO2 emissions, but won't reduce air quality. And walking and cycling would achieve massive co-benefits. So we need to be thinking about how multiple actions address multiple co-benefits in an integrated way.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for ending with the happy news. Yeah, we have a lot to do and we have done some effort, but we definitely continue. So, and this integrated perspective, I guess that's part of what the message we also listening more and more. So this goes to our fourth panelist, Orlando. We heard today that since its establishment in 1994, the Commission for Environmental Cooperation has been very active in promoting North America collaboration to address air pollution, among other things. So, well, considering these years, what do you see as the priorities for the CAC going forward? I mean, are there any lessons also that this experience could also be used for other regions? We heard about it, but also thinking ahead.
All right, thank you, Beatrice. And as you well mentioned, we have been collaborating on air quality and environmental contamination issues for the last 30 years or so. And some of the accomplishments that we have made, for example, the 3 countries now have national emissions inventories for criteria contaminants, as well as pollutant releases and transfer registers, or PRTRs, for toxic air contaminants. The 3 countries' ambient air quality monitoring is shared amongst the 3 countries, Mexico, US, and Canada, through the US EPA Air Now system. And that information is not only shared with the public, but also with the air quality managers and planners at the local level. Also, we have produced where we have developed guidelines for emission estimations for black carbon at the North American level. And as Gary mentioned, you know, if you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. So we need to make sure that with that information that we collect, that we made accessible, we are working with compatible data, that we have a baseline that is comparable across the 3 nations. In terms of priorities right now, well, we are addressing climate, environmental justice, and community participation. And as Jay mentioned, we're going to start implementing a new initiative, air quality improvements for environmental justice. We'll be working in partnership with communities and government agencies to monitor black carbon and particulate matter in different communities across the nation. We're going to partner with the communities. We're going to devise not only the monitoring plan in conjunction with the community, but also the mitigation efforts for the emissions and also for mitigating exposure to those contaminants. In terms of lessons learned, I think everyone has mentioned those, you know, the realization that air is a shared resource. And when you look at North America, you know, 30% of the population, also 2/3 of the population of Canada lives close to 100 kilometers from the US border. When you look also Mexico, the US, you know, also great population centers, a lot of traffic, a lot of trade, a lot of pollutants also, or our coasts also share ship traffic that affects air quality, not only in coastal areas, but also inland. So that realization that we need to be aware that sources in one side of the border affect the other is very important. Comparable and compatible data, as mentioned before, is very important. Not only that the data are like that, but that it is accessible, not only to the public, but also to all decision makers. And I would say, lastly, that if you need to work at the regional level, public participation, again, as mentioned before, is crucial. You want to have actions that are tailored also, or take into account the realities of the communities that are impacted.
Thank you so much, Orlando. I'm looking forward also to see how the projects at the community levels are going. We have a couple of questions from the audience, and I will read it. And please, Eddie, as well as the panelists, maybe you can have some comments about. So it has been a lot of emphasis of air pollution from burning fossil fuels, but not enough attention paid to agriculture. For instance, the impact of livestock, clearing, and the use of fertilizer, as well as manure that emits a lot of pollution, particularly methane. as well as deforestation. So how can clean air action take this into account?
Sure. Actually, we did focus in not only in the North American report, but in the UNEP Global Actions on Air Quality report. We looked at all of the sectors that contribute to air pollution, and agriculture turned out to be one of the larger ones. That was actually a new category, a source category that we added for the 2020 Global Actions on Air Quality report, because we didn't ask as many questions about agriculture in 2016 when UNEP first did this. And it turns out that, yeah, there's a tremendous contribution. In fact, in I think continental Europe, more than 50% of the particulate matter can be attributed to either the ammonia from nitrogen-bearing fertilizers or from wind-blown dust that's kicked up from tilling fields, or black carbon and PM 2.5 from combustion from tractors and so forth. So agriculture is a huge sector, a huge contributor, and we are looking at various types of regulations that can help to reduce the contribution, either looking at regenerative agriculture, conservation agriculture that reduces the use of fertilizer or targets the use of fertilizer so that you don't over-fertilize fields, but also looking at ways to address burning, agricultural burning, minimizing burning, or at least where burning is happening, making sure it's happening very efficiently, and sometimes utilizing waste agricultural products like rice husk to co-fire with other fuels to make the combustion processes that you can't avoid more efficient, but also reducing burning on the whole.
So maybe I can chime in a little bit too here from the California perspective. California is actually, obviously, a very large agricultural state, and one of our prime agricultural regions in the center of the state, the San Joaquin Valley, is also one of the dirtiest areas of the state, partly because it's a large basin, but partly it's because of all of the emissions, partly which are due to the agricultural industry. So we've had some experience, and we've actually implemented many of the things that Gary just talked about. So there are programs, incentive programs, and other programs to clean up old tractors and old pumps that pump water. So we're trying to upgrade those to cleaner and to zero emission. There has been interest from some in the agricultural industry to go to like zero emission, all-wheel drive ATVs and things like that. We have also have programs that help incentivize dairy digesters to collect the methane, which can then be used for a fuel as well. So we have, you know, a benefit on the climate side, as well as reducing the use of fossil fuels. And then we also have programs that are run through our Department of Agriculture to look at what we call a healthy soils program. And so some of those are like the soil, the conservation, agriculture kinds of things that Gary talked about. So these are grants to have people amend their soil, have more composting, using the compost from agricultural waste as well as urban waste to help supplement the soil and reduce the use of fertilizer. So these are all of the things that Gary talked about are things that we're doing and that can be done successfully.
Thank you. And in addition to agriculture, there is also one common question regarding the forest management programs. I mean, we all know that the forest fires are going on, but and because of the warming that we are experiencing, but definitely the forest management programs could be also contributing to reduce the emissions. There's one comment also. Ella Kisi Debra, an 8-year-old child who died of asthma, was the first person in the UK to have air pollution listed as the cause of death on her report. Do you think, and that's a question for the panelists, do you think that this growing recognition of the impact of air pollution on health from hospitals and in the courtrooms through right to healthy air lawsuits can have an impact?
I can get started. If I'm not mistaken, Ella is the first person in the world to have air pollution listed as a cause of death. And I do think that efforts like this, and you know, really my heart and respect goes out to her mom, who has just been such a powerful advocate. But to get the medical community engaged here would be huge improvement. Not that, I think there have been individuals who have been, who have been vocal with their patients and to the public about the importance of air quality. But Ella's story is a really powerful one where she was in and out of hospitals, in and out of doctors, and air quality was never, her proximity to a freeway and air quality was never mentioned by her medical team. And I think that this really points to the need, not just for a regulatory approach, which is essential, but also a medical approach where individual doctors are talking to individual patients, not just doctors, but all clinicians are talking to individual patients about things they can do to avoid their exposure, recognizing that the policy is not moving fast enough and emissions are not dropping fast enough. And if 99% of the world's population is experiencing unhealthy levels of air pollution, we also have to be communicating to individuals about how to protect themselves.
There's another question. If the air quality standards are not protective for public health, and this is probably in light of the more stringent guidelines from WHO, right? Last year. So what will it take for these air quality standards to meet the air quality standards in North America?
I can get started. What will it take for country level standards to meet the WHO guidelines? Is that the question? Yeah. Is it to be protective? So, the WHO air quality guidelines for PM 2.5 for an annual average of PM 2.5 is now 5 micrograms per meter cubed. Like I said, for the US Environmental Protection Agency, our national ambient air quality standard is still 12 micrograms per meter cubed, though I believe a change is coming, but still will end up being at least 2 times higher than the World Health Organization guideline. I think the more research that comes in buttressing the health effects of PM 2.5 at lower levels, the more countries like the United States will look towards revising their standards to lower and lower levels and more protective levels. The standard for nitrogen dioxide that I invoked earlier, which is 10 times higher than the WHO guideline, has not been revised since 1971. And so it's been reviewed and hasn't been revised since 1971. But standards like the US EPA standards are based on the entire body of evidence. And so as that body of evidence continues to build, I think that will point to more and more health protective standards. But I do think that we need to keep in mind that there are health effects that occur below our standards and that these are not set at health protective levels.
And the only point that I would add to that is going back to one of the points I mentioned earlier, is that it's really important that we have in place in North America legal frameworks that require this review of the standards. I think it's every 5 years in the United States. I'm not sure what the periodicity is in Canada, but they're required to go back and look at all of the science and determine if the current standards are protective of public health based on the latest information or whether they need to be revised. And so since the Clean Air Act was passed and since the initial standards were put in place, PM 2.5 wasn't one of the initial pollutants that was even regulated under the Clean Air Act. It was added along the way and the level has been strengthened, and there's an opportunity to continue strengthening it, as Susan indicated. So that's really an important element of the legal framework.
We have one question from the audience.
Thank you very much, Glenn Prickett with World Environment Center. And thanks to the organizers and all the speakers. It's been a spectacular morning. So at World Environment Center, we advance sustainable development through corporate business practices. And one of our priorities is advancing climate justice. So we've started a roundtable for our member companies and other global companies. So my question is for all the panelists, what are the most important things the business community can do to address air quality in disproportionately impacted communities? And then I guess in particular to Susan, you made a really good point about, all decarbonization is not equal and you need to look at co-benefits. So are there tools or protocols you could point to that might help companies sort of assess co-benefits in their decarbonization strategies?
Eddie, would you like to comment?
Sure, I can get us started. I think, the business community is an important part of all of the air quality regulation that we do, I think across the entire country and probably across the entire world. Businesses are part of communities as well. In some of our community steering committees, the businesses that are located within those communities have participated in the discussions and the development of the plans. I think that a lot of the things that I talked about in terms of transparency and building trust and authentically engaging with communities, the same things that we're trying to do in government, I think apply to businesses as well. I think that businesses also, should be thinking about how they are making decisions about what happens at their different facilities. Being able to invest in facilities to improve, so for example, pollution control in communities. There are a lot of instances in which we've had cases where we're looking at trying to, install pollution equipment or something in a facility, and that facility also answers to a larger corporate structure. And so they have, they're like, we want to really do this. We have to make the case to the corporate structure as well. And so it's not just the folks on the ground that are operating the facility that's in the community, but I think having the larger kind of corporate structure be thinking about this. So I'm really pleased to hear that that there is an effort to try to encourage that kind of thinking at the corporate level, because I think it will make a difference on the ground.
To the second question about how we go about this integrated assessment, I have sort of a technical answer and a political answer. The technical answer is that we are starting to have the tools now to be able to assess the emissions impact for a variety of species of any particular project. So that would be the important thing, is to consider not just the CO2 and other greenhouse gas changes, but all the air pollutant precursor emissions and direct emissions of air pollutants as well, in the same framework at the same time, so that you're using the same assumptions, the same data inputs and outputs. And that way you get sort of an integrated assessment of the climate and air quality benefits. The political answer, though, is that I think it's really important to make sure that all the important stakeholders are at the same table. So I think in the past, the reason we have climate mitigation efforts and then separately air pollution mitigation efforts is because we often have different people working on each of those different things. And I think increasingly we have, but historically have not had as much crosstalk between them. And when you think about it from an environmental health, environmental quality standpoint, a lot of the polluting sectors have ministries. There's a transportation ministry, there's an energy ministry, there's an agricultural ministry, which is separate from the environmental ministry and the health, so it's this fragmented governance becomes an issue. I think if you ensure that you're reaching out to all of the people that are in each of these different areas, you're at least getting their perspectives, you're getting their expertise, their wealth of information as the decision process gets carried out.
I would like to add to that, specifically on the air toxics part and the importance of pollutant releases and transfer registers. And this is something that we make accessible to the public. We integrate the information from the TRI in the US, in PRI, in Canada, and the REDSE in Mexico. And we encourage, and we actually work with industry to look at the data. The data is a measure of their efficiency. When you emit toxics into the environment, your processes are not being efficient. So there are people looking at what they report, looking at green chemistry approaches, looking at controls as well, looking at changing processes to abate pollution. Because there, as some people say, now your pollutant register is your label. When you buy a can of juice, for example, you look at the ingredients, where was it made, what's in there. Also, the registers are basically the labels of industry, and they want to be good corporate citizens. So they use that information as well to make decisions, environmental sound decisions, to improve the quality of life of the community around.
Well, good. We have actually many questions, so I will try to summarize them. and one of them, it's related actually to our, I mean, many of the efforts, many organizations such as WRI are trying to do this integrated approach and the focus on the city. So there's one question that about, and they mentioned Susan, but about the walking and biking to gets to land use. I mean, we are actually, that's one question that asks us people, right? So what can I do? And we say, well, yes, non-motorized mobility, walking and biking, but that gets to land use. And so that's a question. And this is only, I mean, this is referring to the US regulator, but I guess it applies to everyone. Other cities regulators is how do we encourage regulators to embrace people first cities and move away from centric cities?
Whoever knows the answer to that, please let me know so I can use it. That's a really great question, and the one that we need to figure out. I think that the thing I would say is that the easier we make it and more convenient we make it for people to engage in cycling and walking, and the safer we make it and the more accessible and the more equitable, the more people will engage in this. And right now, our current situation is that the priority is given to cars and building lanes, and that is not going to encourage people to bike and walk and run safely to work or where they need to go. We also are, thank you, Gary, for just bringing up green space. There's a lot of health research that shows that the more green space there is in the city, the healthier the community is. And that could be through a number of different pathways, but it's the health outcomes are range really from all-cause mortality benefits, reduced all-cause mortality, to mental health benefits. And you can see how this can happen. I am lucky enough to be a bike commuter and ride on an off-road trail for almost the whole way. And it's a very centering experience. It is actually, you can see that direct pathway. But we have the evidence to show that on a population-wide basis, the more green space there is in the city, the healthier the population. We just have not made it safe enough for people, safe and convenient enough for people to make that decision. So I don't at all put this on the individuals. I'm glad the question was framed as how do you communicate this with policymakers, because I think that's where the decision needs to be made to make it safe, equitable, accessible, and convenient for people to choose that healthier and cleaner mode of transportation.
Good, and just one rapid fire question for all the panelists, if you can give us some takeaway messages. If you have some policymakers in front of you from different parts of the world, what will be something that you can tell them that has worked based on the North American experience that we have been talking about, like that happy ending, but also encouraging?
Well, it's not necessarily limited to the North American experience, but in work that I've done with the World Bank and UNEP and around the world, no emissions are good emissions. We need to eliminate all emissions. And I think that the key is to communicate to policymakers and decision makers the multiple development benefits of reducing emissions. That would be my best.
Okay, you want me to go? So I would say AB 617 really reminds us that as important as the science is, as important as the structures are in air quality, that it's about more than just the scientists and the technocrats. It's about real people who breathe the air. And you can't breathe bottled air like you can drink bottled water. It is something that's talked about in the video. And there's a real opportunity to bring people into this process. And in order to address environmental justice and racial equity, it really is a process that talks about sort of working with people collaboratively to build these solutions. And I think that's really the way forward as we start tackling the environmental justice issues.
One thing that I think has worked well is the iterative nature of air quality regulations. And I'll also, we haven't talked at all about the Montreal Protocol and other types of agreements that we have, but the fact that those are iterative and always keeping up with the latest science ensures that our standards are ever improving and being health protective as the scientific research evolves as well.
Yeah, I just want to, I think, echo the words of Eddie. Basically, meaningful public participation You know, when we deal with air pollution, it's not us versus them. Everybody has to have the same information, and we're working towards a common goal of improving air quality. So it's a collaborative effort, but it needs participation from all sectors of society.
Well, we heard a lot today, and I guess we are continuing celebrating, commemorating this day in this effort to do more actions for cleaning our air. So we will have some final comments, please.
Thank you, Beatrice, for moderating this really important conversation, and to all of our panelists. As Gary Clayman said, we know how to do this. We know how to do this. We have a clear agenda. We just need to press it forward in North America and globally. And as we heard from virtually all of our speakers, we need to do that in a way that ensures that the most impacted communities are supported, identified, and not just part of the conversation, but part of the planning. So in closing, it just remains for me, on behalf of the World Resources Institute, the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, and UNEP, to extend the warmest thanks to our speakers and our audience for your participation and for helping us celebrate the International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. Let's keep the conversation going, and let's take action. Thank you so much.